In this video, I'm going to talk about some of the more specific points of the assessment committee and what we do and how things are laid out. This is a good video for somebody who's already watched but all of the other introduction videos, Assessment 101 and things like that, but who really wants to know, how we're planning and coordinating things on the assessment committee. As a broad overview, there's three things that we're trying to do with assessment at the college. One is we're demonstrating compliance. In the past, this is the thing that we focused on solely. And that's just to say that if you've got outcomes on your MCOs, you're trying to show that you are meeting those outcomes. We're trying to move away from just demonstrating compliance, and there's some videos about that you should watch if you haven't. We're trying to encourage improvement. This is really where we're at now. We're really trying to get faculty to think about how they can use assessment to improve their courses. And then the last thing is we're trying to meet the expectations of the accrediting body. So the accrediting body not only wants us to be assessing, which we're always doing, but they want us to show them that we're assessing and that we're assessing in certain ways. And that impacts the way that we do assessment and the focus that we have on certain things like program level assessment or college level assessment. So the next thing I want to talk about is the prepackaged plan. And the prepackaged plan is something we came up with a few years ago to get people thinking in the same direction. We created a common assessment activity so that program level and college-wide assessment could occur. And basically what was happening is before the prepackaged plan, everybody at the college was doing assessment, but they were all doing assessment on whatever outcome, whatever institutional outcome, whatever course outcome they wanted to. And so when we tried to make sense of that at a program level or at a college-wide level, which is really what the accrediting body wants us to be doing, we were unable to do that. You can think of that as like if you were teaching a class and you just told every student in your class, do whatever you want, and then you tried to assess that and give them a grade. It'd be very difficult to do that because you don't know what how to put all of that together to create a criteria for who fails and who passes. So the prepackaged plan allows us to focus assessment in certain ways. So we'll choose a different institutional outcome each year and have the college focus on that. Not everybody will do the prepackaged plan. Some people it won't work. So this year we're doing computation as the prepackaged plan, and I teach English and it doesn't work great. I'm going to try to do the computation prepackaged plan anyway, but there are other English instructors that might say, that doesn't really work for my class. So not everybody has to do it, but we try to encourage as many people to do it as we can so we can write a great report later on. So in the fall, whatever that prepackaged plan is that we came up with, all the faculty will start an assessment based on one of those three institutional outcomes. And then in the winter, we will check on that prepackaged plan, and if possible, we'll present a completed example. So that'll happen typically at in-service, but it might happen at some other time. Also, we need to plant a seed for next year's prepackaged plan. So I'll talk about how we did that in the past. In the past, we did a prepackaged plan that had to do with communication, and it was basically about whether faculty hold students accountable for reading and what impact that has. So in the winter, we actually asked faculty, how are you thinking about communication? And a lot of them said, it seems like my students aren't really doing the reading for the class. And so we that's the seed that we kind of planted there to see, okay, well, how could we talk about communication the next year? And so then in spring, and so that would be winter of 2018-19 year, we planted the seed. And then in the spring of 2018-2019, we actually then kept going with that and asked them, okay, well, how would you feel about an assessment activity where we asked you to hold students accountable for reading in some way, like a quiz or a test, and then you did that and compared the results to when you didn't hold them accountable for reading, and people were like, yeah, I think I'd be into that, I think I would do that. And so that ended up being the fall 2019-2020 assessment activity. So in the spring, there's two things that are going to happen. One is people are going to submit assessment, and there's a whole bunch of videos about how to do that. But then also, we're going to water the seed for that next year's prepackaged plants. So in the winter, we plant the seed, and then in the spring, we water the seed, and then that following fall is when we introduce that prepackaged plan so people will take part in it. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is something that may not be very useful for a lot of you, and if it's not, you can kind of skip ahead in the video until you don't see that title pulling raw reports from SharePoint. But for some of you, especially people who are potentially going to be assessment chair at some point, or who just need to learn how to pull data, this part of the video will be important. There's also another video, or actually two other videos that somebody made who was a previous assessment chair, Bryn, and I can also give you access to those. The only problem with those reports or with those videos is that they are demonstrating SharePoint as it was at that time, and we've since changed the way that SharePoint looks. So some of the stuff will be kind of confusing if you tried to start with that with those videos. So the first thing you're going to do is go to SharePoint page for assessment. You'll go to the portal, Faculty and Staff Workplace, MCO's Assessment Reporting, and then you are going to click on Find Completed Program Assessments here. Here's the page once you do that. Now the page that pops up from there should look something like this, and you'll see that there are some different views that you can look at. You can, you know, at the top it says assessment tracking, and then below that there's different types of views you can look at. I recommend starting off with all items. Now you can click the ellipses next to that, and you can create new views or do all sorts of stuff with this. But at the beginning, I just recommend pulling in all the data that is submitted on here, and that's just because I think that that's the easiest way to start off this process before you know what you're doing. After you choose that all items list, you're going to go up at the top, and you are going to go from browse to list, and then you are going to click on the button that says export to Excel. Now in the video that I've watched to do this, that process of clicking on Excel and opening an Excel document, they said that it might be much more difficult or much more easy depending on what browser you're in and things like that. I was on Mozilla when I opened up this document, so I know that it worked from there, but you might want to mess around with that if you're having trouble. Just know that when you open up, when you go to save that Excel document, it's probably going to ask you to enter your password a bunch of times. And that's because it's logging you into a bunch of different programs. For me, I have to enter my password 4 times, and I have to do that every time I download a new Excel sheet from SharePoint, even if I've already done it that day. Be patient because it takes a while. You know, the SharePoint the Excel document that I've opened up here only has 6 things in it, or 7 things in it. But typically, you know, after this year, there will be 150 things in there. And so it's actually opening up all of those things. So sometimes it takes a little while to do that. And then you go and you save that document. So what you'll probably notice is that those Excel sheets are not very useful for reading and making sense of. So what you want to do is you actually want to turn those Excel sheets into Word documents. So I'm going to show you how to do that next. So you are going to open a blank Word document, and then you are going to click on Mailings. You are going to then click Start Mail Merge and choose the drop-down letters. And then you are going to select recipients and choose use an existing list. After that, you will find your Excel sheet. You will open. You'll click OK if asked, and then you will wait. Then you want to click Edit Your Recipient List and click OK. And what you're going to see is something like this. where you are going to see all the dates that things were modified. Why this is important is because when you download that list of things from SharePoint, it's going to download everything. And so this year that might not matter because we're only going to have things on that list from this year. But next year we'll have things from this year and from next year. And we want to be able to separate those out and only pull the reports that are for the time period that we want to pull reports for. And so you'll want to go through and you'll check off the, you'll uncheck the ones that you don't want and leave the ones you want checked. And you can play around with that to try different things to make it work the way that you want it to work. After that, you are going to click on Insert Merge field and choose which things you want the report to show. So there are a bunch of different possibilities of things that could show. They are things like names. Or like, the question, what did you do for your assessment, or how did your assessment turn out? Those are different fields, and you choose which fields you want to go into this report. I strongly recommend playing around with the different fields. I separate them out so they're not cramped, but I actually do something else that I'll show you in a minute. So one thing you can do is you can preview the results. So you can actually, there's a box up at the top that lets you do that. But you also, like I said before, try out different arrangements. I save my fields so that I don't have to build them out every time. So you'll see that these are the fields that I had chosen, and some of these fields aren't even fields that are available anymore because this was for an old version of SharePoint or old version of the assessment page that we were using. But I had, so up at the top here, you'll see all the different fields, and these are just the things that are possible that you could, that are going to be shown when I finish this document. Down below, I've actually turned that into a form basically. So you'll notice that up at the top it says department value. Well, I wrote the word department colon and then put that little department value in there. And so what will happen is when this report is actually pulled, when all of these individual reports are pulled into this big report, that department value will say department, and then it will list the name of the department. If you don't do that, it'll just list the name of the department. Same thing with name, right? So you might have the name of the person who submitted the report on there. If you don't say name colon and then put the name field in there, then all you'll have is just their name. It won't say name and then give you their name. Now that's not a big deal if you're the only one reading the report and you know what it is that's in the field. But it is a problem when you go to give that report to other people on the assessment committee and they don't know which answer is to which question. So I recommend doing something like that. And again, you play around with those things and figure them out. I didn't understand that right when I first did this, but eventually I got it. So the next thing is that you are going to click Finish and Merge. So you can see on there on the right hand side, Finish and Merge. And then I choose click Edit Individual Documents and click All. And you can do that different ways, but that's the one I choose. And then you'll get something that looks kind of like this. So on this document, I didn't actually play around with, putting in, like I was just talking about, name. So what we see at the top is the name of the person that submitted the report. That's what they entered into the online form that they filled out. Now, if I had typed in name colon and then put the field in there for name, then it would say name Bryce, and then it would say, institutional outcome colon to mathematical reasoning, but I didn't do that. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is actually writing the report, and I didn't have a lot of direction in this, so I kind of had to just make it up as I go. I thought it would be a good idea. I am an English teacher, so I thought it'd be a good idea to try to help people think about a way that they might be able to organize the assessment report. So, we get all of these individual reports in from faculty, and then we have to turn that into one big report at the end of the year. So we're taking all of these individual reports, turning them into one big report that can be given to the vice president, the faculty, and the accrediting body. It's also going to be put up on the website. So my report, the first page just looks like that. I put in a table of contents so it's easier to find things. The first thing is your introduction, obviously. In my introduction, I kind of talked about the large framework of assessment for the year, thinking about things like what goals did you accomplish and what sort of things did you focus on. So you'll see that I have, a little blurb at the very top, and then I have moving, our two big things that we were trying to do this year. We're moving toward program level thinking and creating clarity and tightening up loose ends. So we're trying to get everybody to think about program level outcomes and try to assess towards program level. And then we wanted to make the process easier and fix a few minor things that we were going through. And so those were the big goals. And then underneath that, I have some subtitles. After that, you actually have to summarize and categorize all of the individual reports that faculty have given you. So what I recommend is that you try to get a wide range of things. So you try to get every department that you can, every program in that you can, and have an assessment from them, but also that you try to assess a wide range of types of assessment. So maybe we're doing math assessment is the focus on the prepackaged plan. But maybe only 50% of the faculty did a math assessment, so that gives you an opportunity to pull an assessment from other areas. And how you decide to do that is completely up to you and up to the goals that you have for that year. But I do recommend trying to at least have a wide range of assessment from across the campus. You'll see on here, the right-hand side is what I had on the table of contents. So I actually divided mine up. So I had general faculty assessment reports at the program level and at the course level, and then I had institutional outcome 1 faculty assessment reports to everybody who worked on communication assessment at the program level and the course level, and then I had prepackaged activity faculty assessment reports, so everybody at the program level and the course level who did that. Those faculty assessments are what will take up the majority of your assessment report. That's going to be where most of the writing lies. But you also, at the end of that, you should provide some sort of larger reflection in response to those reports. So talking about, what did you come away with, or what did the assessment team come away with for that? So on here, that's page 16, and on there I just have a page of writing that says reflection and response to faculty assessment reports. Lastly, on the assessment report, I try to talk about the goals and directions for the future of the assessment committee. So what are we planning on working on the next year? So on the table of contents, you can see that I addressed sharing and discussing the assessment report, training for assessment committee members, prepackaged computation plan, update and simplify the online submission process, and define the purpose of assessment. And that just looks like this. I just have a little bit of a blurb saying, this is one of the things that we plan on working with, or maybe it might even include, this is what we did, and then this is how we're going to move forward with that. After you write that report, you do have to share the report. It's part of our contract. It's part of what the accrediting body requires. And so there's really 3 things that I want to mention about that. One is we need to make the report available. Typically how we would do that is we will put it up on the website, and then we will give a copy of it or email a copy of it for in-service. Along with that, it's important to remember that the assessment committee is made up of members of the entire college. So every program is represented in some way on that assessment committee. So part of the job of the assessment committee is to have those conversations with your program, with your department, and talk about what that assessment report means and make sense of that data, and then bring anything back to the assessment committee that needs to be brought back to us for us to talk about and things that we might want to work on moving forward. Lastly, time needs to be made in service for discussing the report in fall or winter. Now, this happens to varying degrees depending on what else we have going on. In fall, a lot of times what we're trying to do is get people preparing their assessment for that year. And so we don't want to spend a lot of time focusing on what happened the year before. So sometimes that has to happen in winter when we have a little bit more time for other things in assessment like reflection. So the next thing I want to talk about is the timeline of assessment for faculty. And you should get a sense of this based on the other videos that there are about assessment, but just briefly, in the fall, faculty need to submit their plans to their deans. This isn't your completed assessment, this is just the first half of the online fillable form, and there's forms for that on the assessment page of Big Ben's website. In the fall, winter, and spring, faculty should actually be doing their assessment in the classroom, and it sounds silly, but nobody puts assessment as their most important task, and so we do have to remind people of that often. What happens is if you wait until the very last week to do your assessment, a lot of times it's not possible because assessment requires planning, and it requires you want to get data in part of your assessment, and then you want to compare data in the next part of your assessment. So you really need to be doing that earlier on in the quarter. So we do need to remind faculty of that often. And then in the spring, faculty need to submit their plans into SharePoint. And there's actually a button that they can push in the assessment part of Big Ben's webpage that will take them directly there. But it's the same SharePoint that we just went to look at all the submitted reports. That's the same place that they will be submitting their finished reports. And those are due the last day of classes. So those are due whenever grades are due. Or before then, it's the last day of the contract year that they're due. Assessment for programs is what we're working on now. So that's what we're really trying to figure out and have a plan and a process for. What we do know is that program heads are required to take the assessment data and submit program level assessment each year. Now, a lot of program heads are already doing this and already have a process kind of set up for this. So there isn't a lot that we need to figure out for them. The big place where we haven't had a process set up in the past and that we're working on now is for the transfer side. The program is the DTA or the transfer degree. And so that program level report must be created in coordination between many parts of the college. When somebody goes and gets a transfer degree, they've taken English classes and psychology classes, and they've taken history classes and biology classes. And all of those departments need to work together to think about assessment in some sort of way as well. And so that might happen with the assessment committee. And the assessment committee has various different departments included within it. And so we can work on that. That might happen partially through the prepackaged plan. And then there might be some assessments that we think about or we think of that we can do for our programs that aren't necessarily tied directly to an institutional outcome or a course outcome, but might be helpful in other ways anyway. So we're still working on this. This isn't a completed anything. So this part of this video will probably be updated at some point. Lastly, for now, is the 7-year plans. So 7-year plans coordinate which courses are tied to which outcomes, as well as when those courses and outcomes will be assessed. And that's a little bit confusing when you first start. If you just go in and you look at the 7-year plans, that's probably the easiest way to understand what they're doing. The program and course outcomes are also listed, or not course outcomes, but the program outcomes are also listed on those 7-year plans. Institutional outcomes are listed there. So go check those out. Again, those are in the assessment part of the college's website. You should be updating the 7-year plan semi-yearly. I wouldn't recommend updating it every year, but every 2 or 3, maybe even 4 years. Full-time faculty at the college who are within each department must go and update those plans. In the past, we've done that at in-service, and that's how it's worked the best because it makes people do it right then. But there could be other ways to kind of arrange that, as long as there's somebody who is going to be accountable for making sure that it happens. Thank you for watching. Obviously, if you're on the committee, if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out, and you can ask your assessment chair or anyone else on the committee any questions that you might have. Some of these things that we're talking about are things that might still be confusing for people even after they've been on the committee for a while. So feel free to ask any questions, and I'll see you at our next meeting.